It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin. I'm
I'm
losing my
excited.
edge. Am I losing my edge on my entry? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I normally do the whole big Esperanza. I don't know. I was I was a little low energy there. I don't know what happened. Anyway.
Yeah, no, but this episode I'm really excited about. I think it's going to be high energy.
I completely think so. I'm absolutely thrilled about it. So you know what, Esperanza, with that lovely segue that you gave me, why don't we really get right into it and bring out our special guest? This is the Director of Preservation Products for an organization that I love and follow on Instagram religiously.
Project.
Yeah, preservation projects, Irwin.
Yes, it is the Director of Preservation Projects for 20th Century Modern. So let's welcome
Hamptons 20th Century Modern.
Hamptons. Hey,
why don't you make the introduction?
Yeah,
Susan?
hey, Esperanza, maybe my low energy is really coming across here. Yes, it's Hamptons 20th Century Modern. And our guest is Susan Horowitz. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Irwin and Esperanza. I'm
Good
very
morning.
happy to be talking to your audience about a subject that I'm so passionate about.
Thank you. Even though my introduction was a little lacking, but
little mangled, but
exactly,
we made it through.
It happens. Hey,
Nobody got hurt.
I like to look at it like that. So yeah, and Susan, we do, all kidding aside, we are passionate about the work you do. So why don't you, just to give our audience a little bit of a background, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it led to this role you have with Hamptons 20th Century Modern?
I can track it through a very long-term interest in architecture. I grew up in New York near Forest Hills Gardens, which was designed by Olmsted and Atterbury, who are Hamptons related names, important ones. And my first visit to the Hamptons was in the 70s when I was an art and art history college student. And I was able to interview de Kooning about his women's series at his phenomenal studio in the Springs that he designed and built. And that confirmed my desire to lead a Manhattan Hamptons cultural life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate in being able to do that, eventually getting my little piece of the Hamptons, a very modest, vernacular, modern house in the woods in Southampton with my husband. But work took us to Los Angeles, and for a number of years, we became bicoastal, still able to take advantage of family life in the Hamptons while we were also in Manhattan and in Los Angeles, where I eventually became an artist curator focusing on documentary photo, text, and video projects about modernist architecture, first in LA, then New York, and then internationally. So it was a natural process for me to follow the architectural tours in the Hamptons and the landscape architectural tours and the arts. And when Tim Godbold got involved in calling attention to the modernist architecture in the Hamptons, I volunteered to work with him, having now been based longer times in Manhattan than in Los Angeles, so that I could use the skills that I had developed in my own work to call attention and advocate for the modernism here.
So
Hey,
I'm trying to unpack your role that you acquired, this documentation role. Could you Could you say that again? Could you explain it maybe in shorter terms?
The, the documentation for Hampton's 20th century modern
Mhm.
is a matter of researching the wonderful texts that we already have by Paul Goldberger and Carolyn Robb Zaleski and Alastair Gordon, who documented the history, the trajectory of how modernism came to be popular in the Hamptons. But all of their work was done a number of years ago. The last exhibition, formal exhibition on architecture was the retrospective on Norman Jaffe at the Parish Museum in 2005.
Mm.
Carolyn's book, Long Island Modernism, 1930 to 1980, was in 2012. Alastair's book was even earlier in 2001, I think, Weekend Utopia. And Paul's book was in 1985.
Yeah.
So
in the midst of it, really.
yeah, and many years have passed, and all three, we're fortunate to have all three present and interested and supportive of the work that we're doing. They've recognized that you need to call attention, and they're making their own efforts and working with us in order to update the point of view on this work and identify the existing significant architecture that's here to protect it in any way we can through advocacy and site studies and surveys so that we don't lose it. We are definitely losing a lot of it in the course of doing this work, which often entails driving around with a list of addresses and seeing whether the architecture that they documented still exists. And in three very, very sad cases, it does not. I myself have driven up to sites and seen a completely different house at an address that happened with one of Norman Jaffe's best works, according to Alastair Gordon, the Sam's Creek development. It was a house that was the first one developed for that area, and it wasn't there anymore. There was a brand new house in its place. It happened a second time in East Hampton with the Gordon Chadwick and George Nelson Spaeth house from the 1950s.
Oh yeah, that was more recent, right? Yeah.
Terrible. And
Just
it was
last year, I think. Yeah.
Yes, yes. No, these are all within the last year and a half.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because
Hey,
I haven't been doing this that long.
Hey, Esperanza. I have to
got
tell
you.
you, it appears that Susan is from Queens.
No kidding. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
We didn't,
Well, I
we
love the
didn't get
fact
this
that
in here.
the forest.
Yeah, come on. And
We've touched on that
we've
area where
touched
you
on it.
grew up. Yes.
Exactly. Well, Forest, it's funny,
yeah.
Esperanza, because Forest Hills Gardens
So beautiful.
came up in our episode about Frank Wyborg's The Dunes in East Hampton.
Yes.
Which
I think also, did it not maybe with Mid Hamptons? I mean, I'm thinking of these developments.
But because Atterbury designed the dunes.
Yeah.
He designed the dunes, the Wyborg, the Wyborg.
Oh, right.
estate.
Yes, of course.
But, Susan, you bring up obviously something that is, I mean, I guess we could call it a mantra on our Hamptons podcast. The mindset, of somebody, and I know when we want to get more into the specifics of the mission of Hamptons 20th Century Modern, and maybe this is a way to segue into it. The mindset of someone, a homeowner, a home buyer, if you will, that doesn't see a Norman Jaffe, we'll just use that as an example, for what it is, and rather sees it as a piece of property to create their own blank canvas. How do you overcome that? How does Hampton's 20th Century Modern overcome that? And is that part of what the mission of the organization is?
I think it's through education about the history, the intentions of it. I think it's important to develop exhibitions that focus on the issues in architecture that are both local and international, including their influence on other architects and practicing architects now. But it's also about different ways of life over the decades out here. And that is something that is very difficult to counter. We are hoping that we can reach young people who might be more open to the lifestyles that the Hamptons initially represented in modern times, of being a casual, more low-key kind of life, without, the need for the mansionization aspects of life. And it's also a matter of seeing architecture as art that you can live in, which is a very big subject in architecture, because you're trying to relate to the landscape, which Norman Jaffe, as an example, was very influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, whose own interests were in organic architecture and relating to place. So if you can maybe relate Jaffe to Frank Lloyd Wright, it might give someone more of an appreciation for the
like a reference, a context that,
Yeah.
that people
Yeah.
can then follow. I mean, history is, I think I've come to the realization for sure, confirmed, history is circular, not linear, but still it's always helpful to have that context. I wanted to just ask you though, you mentioned Timothy Godbold, and how, just quickly, how he lives in a mid-century modern home, or how was it that he really got into this preservation effort?
He fell in love with the area. He came to the area through working for Ralph Lauren, who brought him to this area. Tim is from Australia, and his father was an architect, a modern architect, and he fell in love with the Hamptons. He bought a modernist property by an early Eugene Futterman in Southampton, and he is a designer now. He restored it beautifully. He did all of the landscaping himself. And when COVID hit, he was spending a lot of time roaming around, exploring, and seeing a lot of modernist architecture. And he's into Instagram. So he started putting images on Instagram, and he ended up drawing a lot of attention for it. And he figured that he would join a preservation organization in order to get even more involved. And there wasn't any.
Not that would focus on this area.
No,
right? Yeah.
no. So somebody gave him the Goldberger book on Hampton's architecture, and he started meeting these people, and he got a lot of attention. And soon after, the New York Times picked up on what he was doing. And that really got a lot of attention. I saw the New York Times article, and I thought, this is so fantastic. This relates to issues that I've dealt with in my own work in researching modernist architecture. First in Los Angeles with the modernists from the 30s, Schindler and Neutra, and later Lautner and others, and unpacking stories behind both the clients and the architects. And I thought, I'm going to be in New York longer periods of time now. And I can use the skills that I have in photo and text and research and video to work with him. And that's what happened.
What great synergy. That's amazing. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
really is a great story. And, you know, it must be so difficult to overcome. And I want to just get back to the mindset. Esperanza, if you recall, we had an episode with a couple of terrific architects out here, Oza Sabbath out of
Yeah.
Bridgehampton, and they were incredibly honest about what they were facing from their side. And again, remember, while architecture, I guess we can call, is somewhat of an art form, at the end of the day, it is a business, and these people are trying to make a living. And you know, one of them, Peter Sabbath, that, you know, on the episode was actually saying, at the end of the day, unfortunately, and this is a theme on our Hampton, Susan, that you've probably heard, to the people that are buying some of these properties, it's ultimately a commodity. And what happens is the end game, the return is greater at the end if you can build a larger structure. So I guess
Right.
everyone
In
is
other
sort
words,
of,
the commodity becomes the land. So,
yeah,
and what Susan is asserting is, you know, these architectural gems should be considered like a blue chip piece of art. You know, I mean, they're really,
absolutely.
and so they should be part and parcel with the value of the land. And yet that's not how they're being treated
Right, right.
One of the
in
things
so
that
many instances.
one of the things that we're doing in our 2024 Hamptons 20th Century Modern Tour is having an Oza Sabbath house that is a reimagining of one of these mid-century modern houses. So it's an interesting way to show how, in the hands of architects who really appreciate the modernism that has come before, how they can adapt them.
Right. Yeah.
We also have another example of an adaptation of a Julian and Barbara Nesky house. It's their own house done in about 1965. That's in Watermill, and it's next door to a very lovely traditional Hamptons house. And the owner bought this small 1,200 square foot Julian and Barbara Nesky house in order to adapt it through the landscape architecture and restore it and use it as a guest house. And to me, the juxtaposition of the two styles is fantastic. And it's a great way to conserve our architecture. And Barbara Nesky is a wonderful case in point in terms of the need to call attention to the historic architects who worked out here. She is in her 90s and has never gotten the attention to her career that she deserved. So that is one of the goals that we have with the work that we do. And it'll be wonderful for her to be able to see that we're including her own home designed for her family on the tour this August as
This
well.
August. Imagine that, a whole family living in a 1,200 square foot home.
That's how it used to be.
That's what my house is.
Yeah.
My little house in the woods.
Yeah.
Well,
That's how it
don't
used to
you
be.
don't need much with all this
No,
lovely outdoor space.
no. That's now the primary bedroom, secondary closet. Anyway,
But we don't go there.
we don't go there, of course not, Esperanza. But you know, Susan, in terms of the modernism preservation, if you will, how is Eastern Long Island doing in terms of, in comparison? Look, we're not the only area that's facing these kind of pressures. How are we doing next to
Absolutely.
the Cape? How are we doing next to Palm Springs or other areas?
One of my goals in terms of advocacy has been to bring in organizations that can help us constructively deal with these issues. One of them is DOCOMOMO, which is an international, national, and local organization that works to develop strategies for protecting significant modernism all over the world. And I was lucky to have the executive director last summer on our 2023 tour moderate a panel about comparing us to all of these different places in Europe as well, in Asia. It's happening everywhere. And there are strategies for developing awareness so that we're working with them. They're supporting us. There is a DOCOMOMO tri-state chapter. So we're trying to get their members involved and asking architects to contribute ideas. I'm very thrilled that we are partnering with Preservation Long Island, who until recently were not supporting modern architecture as part of their mandate. They have a new director of preservation projects, and she is getting very, very involved with our efforts. And we're partnering on exhibitions and support for one another in these efforts. So I think that those are very, very positive developments.
Yeah.
And, I have a history of working with Getty Conservation in Los Angeles. The people in conservation want to help other people.
Yeah.
So, we can adapt ideas that we see happening there. We need people. One of the comparisons I'd like to bring up is Cape Cod, where they've been able to set up a foundation to protect the important modernism that was developed on a very tiny scale there. These are really hand-built little houses by Marcel Breuer and others. And they were able to set up a foundation. And we need people who can step up and help in those areas. I'd like to call attention to a singular place, and we had this on our 2023 tour. It's the Paul Lester Wiener mid-century house that was designed for the art collectors Robert and Ethel Scull, which became a very important site of pop art and feminism, political feminism in the 60s. And during COVID, this is another positive COVID story. The designer Lisa Perry bought the site and did a beautiful job of restoring it and making it into a nonprofit arts center for women's art. We need other people who see the value of the art, of the architecture as art.
That's
Right.
okay. This is exactly where I'm glad you brought up the Lisa Perry example. Look, obviously, a Lisa Perry is going to have a little more awareness than the average Mr. and Ms. John Q. public, if you will. You discussed this about encouraging owners of these homes to protect them, and perhaps more importantly, the new buyers to consider them. In Esperanza, many of the new buyers are shielded behind LLCs. You can't even find out who these new buyers are half the time,
Right.
more than half the time. So how does Hamptons 20th Century Modern do that, Susan? Or can they do that? Okay, you saw, I'm going to make it up, that Bunshaft house just sold. It's a small 1,400 square foot house on an acre of land in a prime estate section of East Hampton, Southampton, whatever. Take us through your steps of how you can get to those owners and maybe do something about it, or is there?
Well, the actual
plan?
Bunshaft was a terrible story.
That was a long time ago, but I
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah, that was a long time ago. But
I was just giving that as an example.
one of the things that has happened, like there's a small, very wonderful Gwathmey in the Northwest Woods. And it has gone through several different owners. I think that in most of the cases, it was someone from the design world or an architect a young architect who bought them. And those are people who do appreciate the architecture as art, and whatever interventions they do are done with the understanding of the intention of Gwathmey. So I think that, you have to hone in on focus in on the kind of buyer. And I think that in Los Angeles, we have been lucky to have real estate people who really cared about modernist architecture and figured out ways to market it to those kind of people. And we need people. We have a couple who are working more in that mode, but we need the real estate industry to step up and realize that is the way to market it, not just a Sotheby's auction of a Jaffe that probably went to a developer on Further Lane and will probably be demolished unless, we can hope that I'm wrong and that's not the case, and the person who bought it wants to restore it.
And
So essentially, I mean, it's the role of the realtor. I see it as a role of a bit of a role of not only awareness, but education, to educate their clientele. And it's very sensitively. I mean, there's no reason why that couldn't be done and should be done. And not just for the modernist architecture, all of it, just to have more sensitivity to what exists, rather than simply, as you hear all the time, it's a tear down.
Right.
And that's something that comes it's like very easy, rolls off the tongue of many realtors. And that's tough. I think their mindset also needs to change, not just the client's mindset, but their mindset.
I mean, these houses, for me anyway, Esperanza, they should, you're buying a legacy. You're buying a lot more that you're buying a lot more than land and four walls, and look, obviously someone with artistic sensibilities on Eastern Long Island right now sometimes cannot necessarily afford these kind of properties anymore. But that's where I see that lane. Now, Susan, you mentioned, so Los Angeles, you find the realtors are more sensitive to this than they are on the eastern end of Long Island?
That's interesting, because I've seen a lot of destruction there as well. Hasn't there been?
There has been destruction. There's a big case going on right now, a house I'm very familiar with. But in the main, we have agents there who developed companies that focused on architecture and architectural history. And I think that we need to encourage that. So it doesn't mean that you're not still going to lose things. I mean, I think that we need to really explore the whole idea of preservation easements. There is a Barbara and Julia Neske house in Barnes Landing that exists today only because it had a preservation easement on it.
And by preservation easement, you mean like a facade easement? So that the exterior can't be changed?
I don't know. That's one thing I want to research. I would love to get a look at what it was and who did it
and
why they did it. And I'd like to use that story to encourage other owners to try to protect their home. We have a lot of people who are the original owners of important architecture who have grown children, and we don't know what the futures are going to be, but maybe there could be a preservation easement so that the structure will not be destroyed. In this case, there's a very big addition to it, but the signature structure was not very large, and it was incorporated. into the addition. And that's a win. We have to consider that that's a win.
Right.
It wasn't demolished.
Right. And,
Right.
if you find that there's, you mentioned lifestyle, and we harken back, and we're not trying to romanticize the past here. Okay.
Right.
And to quote
But we
Paul,
do all the time.
but we do it anyway. And to quote it from our very first episode, Paul Goldberger, we're not East Hampton town is not a museum frozen in time. We
Yes.
understand all this, but you harken back to a simpler lifestyle, but then on one hand, wow, why can't people really embrace that lifestyle of days gone by, the simple reasons we're out here? And then you juxtapose that with, well, this is a significant financial commitment. I have to maximize my return. It is such a difficult balance. I mean, my gosh, and that must be one of, if not the biggest frustration Hampton's 20th century modern deals with. I mean, it's so difficult to really overcome. I know I keep going back to that, but I can't help it. That's
The super wealthy people who can afford these giant properties, very expensive, also often care about art and are art collectors. And I find that the art world does seem to understand the architectural issues better. And, we can point to some major art world people, including Larry Gagosian,
I
who
was just going to
owned
say Toad Hall.
fabulous
Yeah.
Gwathmey complex.
Mhm.
So to me, that's the most helpful route
right.
to preservation, are people who are building important art collections and
Right.
want a place that reflects that aesthetic,
Yes.
that aesthetic world to show them in. And we have very good architects working out in the Hamptons who understand the history, who have been influenced by it. So I think we have some very good modernism that's being built. It's the more vernacular combinations of styles that are problematical.
Right.
But we don't have any money. We have no, it has to be, it's an intellectual
Right.
argument, and hopefully in a practical sense, it's site surveys and town surveys of
Yeah, I
what
was
is
just
important.
going
Yeah.
to ask you about that. I mean, I touched on the role of the realtor, but what about the role of each municipality to survey these properties, these homes, and put them on the map, as you have done already? But if they do it, at least if it could be a collaborative process, it might make it go faster, right?
I am realizing that is the route
Yes.
to successful documentation. It's very hard for us to do it on our own. I have an architect, historic preservationist working for us in co-writing these reports. But I think that we have so many, I mean, we're so lucky to have such a huge body of modernism out there, we think, that still exists, that we need to go directly to the towns and villages and enlist them in this effort. It's too much to handle for a small advocacy group.
Right. And there
Relying on
is some
social media.
Right, which has worked, very well so far, but needs to go farther. But and you more recently there has been some movement in that regard with the village of Southampton. Is that right? With regard to
Yes, it's controversial, but they have been very brave and strong in designating 5 properties in Southampton Village, which is a very special case, modernist homes, that they believe are truly contributing to the architectural history of Southampton Village by bringing it into modernism.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they want to protect those 5 homes before they're destroyed by the financial situation that is so competitive
Yeah.
Right.
in
Right.
the competitive market in Southampton Village. So it would have been great if there could be very specific advantages for the homeowners, tax advantages. I don't know what else. We're bringing in preservation lawyer specialists who can maybe come up with some ideas.
Yeah. You know, and
And
Susan,
I don't know how this is going to go. And, of course, we have people with a lot of means and it's very contentious. But, our role was just to help them identify what was significant in modernism. And a lot of what we uncovered was very, very sad. There were some
Yeah.
very interesting modernists who were able to build in the area, and things were just destroyed
Yeah.
for giant homes that look like hotels.
Yeah. We have to start wrapping up, but Susan, I agree. This is again something Esperanza and I have talked about. Esperanza, it's almost as if the towns shouldn't only look upon a historical farm from the 1800s as something of value to save,
Right.
be it with CPF funds or whatever else, but
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
mid-century moderns deserve the same kind of respect. And maybe through the efforts of organizations like Susan's, that kind of thing can
Yeah,
start to
there's
take place. It's
again,
the
they have
government
that power. Yeah.
governments need to be educated as well.
Totally.
And,
Totally. They need to be brought up to the 20th
and
century.
and it's something, Esperanza, it's been a constant theme on our Hamptons, the Bayman, the fisherman, the abstract expressionist. And hey, let's throw the mid-century
And the Norman Jaffes.
modernist architects are an essential piece of the fabric of Eastern Long Island.
Certainly.
Susan, as we wrap up, tell us what 20th century Hamptons 20th century modern is currently working on. Any upcoming events you want to promote before we close this podcast?
Sure. I would refer the audience to the Hamptons 20th Century Modern website and Instagram for information on our 2024 architectural tour. We will have homes by Norman Jaffe and Andrew Geller, and the Neskis, Peter Blake, Horace Gifford, and current architects, as we earlier discussed, who are working with modernism currently. We will also probably have a Norman Jaffe, I'm sorry, not Norman Jaffe, Myron Goldfinger retrospective pop-up show. And we're planning exhibitions on other architects that I've mentioned and that you'll see on our website. And we're developing extensive site survey studies, and we'll be talking to the towns about them. And we look forward to everyone's input and identifying any modernist homes near you that might be under the radar.
Wow. Susan
Terrific.
Horowitz, the Director of Preservation Projects for Hamptons 20th Century Modern. Visit them at hamptons20thcenturymodern.org. I think I have that correct, right, Susan?
Yeah, it's
And
Hamptons 20th century
20th,
modern.
yes, numeric 20.
20.
Hamptons20thcenturymodern.org. Google it, you'll find them.
Yes.
Susan, thanks so much for being our guest on our Hamptons podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm a
Wonderful to have
fan.
you.
It was
Thank you.
It was a lot of
It's
fun.
mutual.
Absolutely. Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.